Okay, so this is not part of the Q&A. This is totally bonus. It's for free, and you can thank me later. I've been doing some deep diving, some deep thinking about America. This just feels, this time of year to me always feels completely discombobulating and lost. I'm too old for Christmas. We don't really celebrate it anyway. Work is weird, it's incredibly intense, and then there are moments of like, where everyone's like, is the year over? Is it over? Are we starting yet? Or is it re-over? Can we relax? What do we do? So it's a weird time of year. It's giving me time to think. And I'm like, America seems like it's in a weird spot right now. How do we get here? And after all of the research I've done, and I'm using that term research as someone who is maybe a conspiracy theorist when they say, oh, I've done my research, and then you realize they didn't, they just Googled something. Keep that in mind. I'm along those same lines when it comes to my in-depth research. I kind of figured out why America is where it is, and that is because no one, and I mean no one out there has made a serious attempt at a sequel to Urban Cowboy. I know what you're thinking. You're like, MILNOR, that was an abomination of the 1980s. Hear me out, why this movie is so important, and why, had someone made a sequel, we wouldn't be in the shape we're in. If you think I'm a casual Urban Cowboy observer, you are wrong. And the first thing I have to state is, I not only saw the movie when I was in elementary school, I read the book. I remember exactly where I was. I was in my grandmother's house in Ohio, in a specific room that my brother and sister and I would all fight over who got to sleep in that room. There were two beds in the room, my grandmother's bed and then this little tiny torture device that would also could be called a cot if you were in a generous mood. We would fight over who got to sleep on the cot in this room. And my grandmother, by the way, slept with a radio this big, pressed up against the side of her head with the volume turned all the way up. And yes, the three of us would fight to sleep in this room because the other rooms in this old farmhouse were so creepy that no one wanted to sleep in them. I read Urban Cowboy in that room. So I'm what I would call an expert on Urban Cowboy. Number one, Urban Cowboy brought us mesh shirts. The Scott Glenn character, Wes Hightower, wore a black mesh shirt. Now, my friends and I were like, that's the coolest thing we've ever seen. We all suddenly were wearing mesh shirts. We would wear them to school and no one batted an eye. A full-on mesh shirt. And not just kids that were in good shape. Kids of every size, shape, and color were wearing mesh shirts to school. Thank you to Urban Cowboy. Number two, that belt loop move, dancing, where you put your like fingers in your belt loops and then you go like this. No one on earth had ever moved in that fashion ever before anywhere. Urban Cowboy. Number three, Scott Glenn's character Wes Hightower was an ex-con, but he was gainfully employed. That's a great symbol. That's the way it should be. You go to prison, you do the crime, you do the time, you get out, you're reformed, and the public says, you know what, man or woman, you put your time in, we're gonna give you a second chance. He had a second chance running the mechanical bull, which we'll get to in a minute. Next, the main character, Bud, played by John Travolta, was an oil and gas hero. He worked at the refinery outside of Houston, where Gillies was, the restaurant or the bar where the whole thing took place. Oil and gas needs a hero because, let's face it, they're on a slippery slope. They've been doing some shady stuff for decades and now it's all getting exposed and then they do more shady stuff trying to cover it up. They need a hero like Bud. They don't have one, they should find one. Number, whatever this is, 5 or 6, Deborah Winger. Do I need to say more? I have so much respect for Deborah Winger because Deborah Winger became an absolute superstar. She did Officer and a Gentleman. She did Urban Cowboy. She became uber famous and she disappeared. I have tremendous amount of respect for that. And now she'll pop up every now and then doing projects, but I love the fact that someone was like, yeah, I don't want to really live this lifestyle. I'm just going to make good movies. Not to mention she was in Sheltering Sky. And I remember in elementary school seeing her and I was like, I don't know what that is. I just want one of those. That was the one thing that I pulled from that. So Deborah Winger, 5-star. And lastly, the mechanical bull. The mechanical bull became and should have become a national pastime, a national sport. And really, they would let anyone on mechanical bulls. You could be 8 years old and the guy'd be like, look, man, whatever, you got the cash, pony it up, 15 bucks, and then boom, that, you know, probably another guy on the controller was just trying to work you to death. I actually went to a bar on Sunset Boulevard in LA in probably the early 2000s, And it was a country western bar on Sunset Boulevard. We're talking prime real estate. For all I know, it's still there. And they had mechanical bulls. And we sat in there as if this was a totally normal thing. It's not normal. It never has been. It never will be. And what do we have to thank for that? Urban Cowboy. That's why I think, had we done this complete cinematic experience would have really brought us to a new America. And right now, we're having to question all the decisions we've made since then. And I'm frankly kind of pissed about it. But let's get on to the Q&A. What do you say to another Q&A? Oh, look how clever I am. So anyway, I've got a bunch of stuff happening right now. I am in the process of a shifter rebuild, which I'm going to make a film about later today, to walk you through exactly what I'm doing and why, and also admit to you something I just did that some of you are probably not going to be too happy about, and that's deleting all of my subscribers and my newsletter subscribers on my website. Sorry, but I have a reason for why I did that and why I'm starting over. And I think the reason outweighs the inconvenience of some of you if you have to go back in and re-sign up for subscription to my site. I apologize, but again, I'll explain the whole thing in a film. I've got a ton of blurb stuff going on. What else do I have? I have tons of personal stuff going on, family things happening. Just booked a trip to Mexico, which I'm going to skip over for now. That could be interesting, but I won't know if the trip's a go until probably 3 weeks out, sort of thingy, but I'll give you the details when I can, if I can. But we've got a Q&A. I have 11 questions. The last one is out of totally right field. The last question is about my coffee recipe and my smoothie recipe, both of which are, I have to say, elite level. We're talking not only professional level coffee recipe and professional smoothie recipe, but it's the elite of the professional. And anyone who argues with me will be dealt with in harsh fashion. Question number 1. Sorry, I sneezed right before I started this, so I could easily blow a snot rocket right now, but I'm going to save you that. Maybe for later for like a cycling film or hiking film. How do you feel? Question number 1. How do you feel about Jimmy Chin, who's a creative director, filmmaker, photographer, climber, skier, if you don't know? Jimmy Chin and his new book. So I'm going to take the second part of that question first. What do I think about his new book? I don't know because I haven't seen it. However, that's not the question to ask. Oh, that's not the question. The book could be good, could be bad. Doesn't matter. The question to ask is, why would someone like Jimmy Chin, at that status level, at that success level, at that level of success of being what I would call an online social media darling, and I don't mean that in a bad way, the guy's earned it, why on earth would someone like that make a book in 2021? That is the question you ask yourself. Because for all of you people out there who have said to me, this goes back 20 years of blogging, we're in the digital age, man. Why would you make a books are irrelevant, print is irrelevant, print means nothing, this is the digital age, get your work on social media as fast as possible, that's all that matters, why build an archive, blah, 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 blah. The book is a calling card, is a statement that's unlike anything in the digital space. When someone says, what kind of work do you do? And you hand them a book, especially a book that was done with a publisher, depending on the publisher, every book deal's different. I see plenty of horrible photography books done with publishers, but in this case, my guess, because Jimmy is a sizable following and he has an incredible track record, and those people are rare. And so that book, even at his level of career, the book is a calling card that's unlike anything else in the digital space. That's the important part. I'm sure the book is good, and I'm sure I'll see it at some point. The other book I've been hearing about literally every day for the past 2 weeks is Matt Black's American Geography. I've had a few conversations with him over the years. I don't know him. His work has been good for a long time, so I'm not surprised that whatever book he did is good. I have sort of a little embargo happening when it comes to buying new photo books. I just have too many as it is, and we are trying to downsize. And my guess is that at some point in the near future, my wife and I will probably start spending part of each year overseas to get away from some of the climate here in America, but also just to live in places that we want to live. So we are trying to downsize. I'm giving books away. I'm not buying new ones, even though I'm sure these books are fantastic. Now, how do I feel about Jimmy Chin? I've never met him. I don't know him, never spoken to him. My guess is that somewhere out there we have a mutual friend here. In fact, I know we have a mutual friend, but I've never met him. But I love the guy. So, and I got to tell you a story. So this goes back to 1990, I guess, University of Texas in Austin. I'm an undergrad photojournalism major. and I'm bored out of my mind. I had already been working as a photographer before I came into the school, and I felt like the school was holding me back, and I was frustrated. And I sort of voiced my opinion to someone, not the director of the program, but somebody else. And the guy said, let me see what I can do. So he came back and said, I got you permission to take a graduate documentary class, even as an undergrad. So I got in, and there were like 8 people total in this whole class. And when I walked in on the first day, the instructor, who I do not remember who it was, looked at me and said, see that guy sitting over there, that guy named Rick? That's your subject matter for the entire semester. So whatever that was, 3 or 4 months of semester, they assigned me to another human being in the class. It happened to be a guy named Rick. When I first was introduced to Rick, and I said, you know, what do you do? What are you doing in this class? He said, I'm a writer, but I'm a climber. That was the first time anyone had ever said to me, I'm a climber, and I didn't actually know what that meant exactly. So I was assigned to document him for the entire semester. Now, what this guy taught me, Rick, the writer slash climber, when we first had our meeting to start this relationship, his job was to document me as a writer, and my job was to document him as a photographer. He was so observational and so detailed in his observations and went so far beyond where I was that even from the first meeting, because what would happen is when we would get together, I would document, he would document. And then we would have to share what we had accomplished. So I was reading his writing about me, and he was looking at my photographs of him. And the first meeting we had, which was in a little Vietnamese restaurant near the university, I walked in and he was detailing every movement I made from the time I walked in that building. And I had never done that before. I'd never been that detailed in my observations. And he like flipped a switch in me that was really helpful. No idea where he is today, but I would love to find him. His 2 best friends were full-time climbers, one of whom was a professional and also was an editor at one of the big climbing magazines. Odd, weird story here. That guy's wife at the time was the sister of one of the chief financial officers at Blurb 25 or 30 years later. Our CFO at Blurb said to me, oh, that's my sister. Talk about weird connections. But anyway, I was sent on this class to document. So that was my first experience with climbers. And that's around the time I first heard the name Jimmy Chin. And I knew Jimmy Chin as a climber and a skier long before photography. And the reason I'm bringing this up is this is really important to me. There's a whole lot of people out there who have nothing but photography, and they think they're way better than they actually are. And they're pouring all of this time and energy and money into trying to get discovered when in fact that's all they have. And they're not particularly good at photography. They've looked at what other people have done, they've copied it, and now they're kind of going, why don't I have the same success that so-and-so has? Jimmy had climbing and skiing before photography. And I'm not talking about dabbling in these sports. I'm talking about full, lifelong commitment to those sports. And to me, that's what it takes. Also, he has an incredible track record. He skied off of Everest. That sounds like a crazy, although I just saw a clip this morning of a guy who skied off of K2. So I guess people are upping the stakes all the time. I can't ski the bunny slope at Santa Fe Ski Basin. I could if you gave me a whole day and like armored me up in pads and helmets. I could get down the mountain. I can't ski, let alone ski Mount Everest. Jimmy's now known more probably for the free solo documentary winning the Academy Award. But think about that. You've got a guy who can produce, you've got a guy who can direct, you've got a filmmaker, you've got a still photographer, you've got a climber, you've got an Academy Award winner. That is a rare set of ingredients. And that's what I love about the guy. Again, never met him, never talked to him. What I love is the fact that he is a 5-tool player. He can do everything. And photography is just one of those things. I'm much more interested in the human being and the complete package of the human being. And frankly, and this is gonna hurt to some of you out there, I encounter photographers all the time who are pretty good at pressing the button. They actually have a pretty interesting way of seeing things. They may have a great angle on a story. They may have this or that, but they're not people I want to hang out with. Not at all. I mean, it happens. Last week, happened twice. This week, I don't know, it's early. I encounter people all the time that I'm like, okay, this person is kind of talented, but I don't want to be around him. Jimmy seems like a cool guy. Plus, I have ties to Wyoming as a kid. He lives in Jackson Hole, from what I understand. That's kind of cool too. So I'm sure his book is awesome. He's constantly out there making stuff. And the great thing is that he has a level of power and control now that's not common. So my guess is after winning the Academy Award and getting that sort of recognition and success, he has the ability to cherry pick more what he's going to do and how he's going to do it. And that's when people make their best stuff, is when they're left alone with their own ideas, their own time frames, budgets, which is, that's a stretch, but that's where interesting stuff happens. It's not people working under deadline and tight budgets for clients they don't want to work for, which is kind of the norm. Question number 2. How do you feel about photographers who identify by brand or film type? It's silly, but it's innocent, right? It's silly. These people who are posting on Twitter, I shot this on Portra 400 and like 10,000 people hit the like button. Who cares? The only people who identify with like what camera they used and what film they used are consumers. These are amateurs who are fixated on that kind of thing. But here's the thing, it's innocent. If you're jazzed about Portra 400 VC or UC or NC, cool. There's a lot of people in the world who are jazzed about things that are evil and awful. We see it every day in the news. If that's the kind of thing that you want to see, there's plenty of it out there. So for some, I don't know, some kid, some hipster, some old person to say, look, I'm totally fascinated by Portra 400 NC rated at 100 and push 2 stops, and that's what I'm going to post every time I put an image online. I'm going to put that because that's how I did it, and I'm really proud of that, and I think that's important for whatever reason. Let them do it. In the scheme of photography, it means nothing, but it does identify you immediately as a consumer. Pros do not do that. They don't really waste their time. And no one in the pro field, the clients that you're working for, they don't care. They're looking at the end result. And clients are looking at all kinds of things that are somewhat related to the end result, but they're also related to the actual shoot itself. Who are you? What do you look like? What do you dress like? How do you speak? What else do you know besides photography? How are you with the clients? Are you well-rounded? Do you have a sense of humor? Do you take yourself too seriously? Are you too geeky? All of these things factor in. The end result photography, yes, it's important, but it's not everything. Nobody once ever on any shoot I've ever done in my life, anywhere, for any reason, for any client, has ever asked me what camera brand or film I'm using. Not once. They don't care. If I offered it up to them and said, look, I shoot Leica rangefinders for this reason, they'd be like, good, whatever, makes you happy as long as you get us what we want. We don't care. So again, instant identifier as consumer amateur photographer, but innocent because people in that crowd love that stuff, man. I see it all the time because I'm such a social media darling that I spend all my time on there looking for positive affirmation from strangers and bots. That's what I want for Christmas. Is I want a bot that cares about me as an individual. Question number 3. This is a good one. How do you recommend organizing research materials for a long-term project? Fisheries, this is a guy who's doing a project on the fisheries in Washington State, and he has PDFs and quotes and photos and articles, and he's currently using Google Docs and notebooks, and his organization, from what I can put together, is basically a mess. I have to say, the best tool for organization I have is right here. This is an older iPad Pro. This little thing right here is worth its weight in gold. The iPad Pro that's connected to whatever cloud source is your cloud source of favor. And this thing is great. I can pick up this pen. I can draw, sketch, write, but I can also very quickly slide that into the slot, hit the keyboard, everything. And I use something called, what's it called? The program I'm in right now, which of course I'm in it, so I can't see the name. What is this? Notability. Notability is the app that I'm in, and it's great, and those fire up to the cloud. I write all my letters. I'll tell you what I have right now. I'll tell you the categories I have. I have recent notes, unfiled notes, 0. Shifter category, I have 103 notes. Film studies, 85. For what it's worth, collaboration, blurb, AG23, books I'm reading, and my wife's, of course, has elbowed her way in. My wife came in and said, well, how come I don't have a folder on there? And I was like, well, I'll create one for you and then we'll never use it. But she'll feel like she's part of the team. It's what happens when you're married this long. Little victories, people, little victories, like a leaf in the current of a stream, sucked down into the wasteland below. The iPad Pro is awesome. It's small, light, the pen, as long as it's connected to the cloud so you've got backup, it's a fantastic way of organizing everything. It's the only computer I have I like. Put it that way. Don't like my phone. My phone is fickle and will betray me at some point. My main primary computer from Blurb is 10 years old. It's an old trash can Mac. And then the new laptop I have that they gave me a couple of years ago It's fine if you're doing email. It's not a laptop designed for motion, and it's all over the place, and it literally is possessed and does things where I'm like, I have to light candles and burn sage over it and just hope for the best. I do love this iPad. That's what I would do. I would just source everything through this. I would keep this with me all the time. And then I would use the paper notebook for something else. I would use the paper notebook for the times when you put all your electronics away and you're just left with your own thoughts, because I do, did I mention my mechanical pencil fetish? It's beautiful. It's beautiful, man. Like Tom Cruise and Taps. Number 4, do you think young photographers can still get the benefits of working at a newspaper, working under deadline, blunt critiques, ethical decisions, and so, if so, how? The short answer is absolutely. Newspaper photographers never got the credit they deserved, and they still don't get the credit they deserve even today. Newspaper photographers, when you're in a circle of professional, commercial people, and you're talking about advertising, commercial, annual reports, fashion, editorial, newspaper photographers are often sort of like, nah, that person works for a newspaper. Oftentimes, they are the single best photographers I ever encounter because they are so well-rounded and they can do everything. Not to mention, they work on deadlines and they're fast and they have to adapt and they have to get into situations and out and have to get permission where they know they're not supposed to be and they have to still get in there. You also have to do things that scare the living hell out of you. I had to shoot a guy on a perp walk one time, a perp walk. That's when the cops have arrested somebody, but they haven't charged him yet. And you know what? They may or may not be innocent or guilty, but you have to photograph them. And when they get out of the car and they see you, they're not happy. And so you better hope that there's a sheriff's deputy or somebody between you and them, because if there isn't, it's on like Donkey Kong. And you better practice your bobbing and weaving like Jim Carrey and Me, Myself, and Irene. That kind of thing, because these people are not happy. That's not fun, but that's an assignment that you may end up doing at a newspaper. Newspapers are awesome. They also teach you the ethical things that are involved around photography. I did a picture one time of a young kid. He was probably, I don't know, 16. His parents had committed, his father had come to the house that night, shot his mother, killed her, tried to kill the kid, didn't, went in the front yard, killed himself. I show up the next morning, they're like, get a picture of this kid, and I'm like, oh, great. And you know, there's police everywhere and family coming in, and it is a horrible, horrible situation. I parked across the street, waited for a lot of people to leave, kids in the front yard. I'm thinking, this is my time. I make the picture, kid sees me, gets in his parents' car, puts it in reverse, floors it, drives across the street, smashes into my truck, drives off, and never comes back again. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that newspapers can teach you how to adapt to. And then when the cops come and you go, look, this is what happened in my truck, they go, we don't care, we're not helping you. And you're like, okay, I'm learning more and more things every day. So yes, how you would go after a newspaper today, I don't know. All of the paths that I had are gone. But what I would do is just start researching. And I would figure out what papers are left in the US, Washington Post, LA Times, people that are still doing real reportage, in-depth, cutting certain photographers loose for extended periods so they can go and do projects. Michael Robinson Chavez, who I think is with WAPO right now, Washington Post. Chavez was at LA Times for a long time. That's where I met him. That guy's doing amazing stuff. Gail Fisher at the LA Times historically was doing stuff, but all the great newspaper photographers of the past, there was a 30-year time frame where their names were front and center every day in photography. They were the ones covering the war in the Balkans. They were the ones covering everything. Carol Guzzi out of Miami. It goes on and on and on. Research. Number 5. When selling or gifting prints, what is the best way to sell them? Mounted, unmounted, plastic sleeves? Oof, that is such a good question with a horrible answer. I wouldn't frame stuff anymore. Here's what I do. My signature is so horrible that I don't sign my prints on the front. I go in verso. I sign on the back. And then what I tell the person to do is if that signature is important to them, then have it framed with a cutout in the back where you can see the signature. Framing is an art form in itself, and people should be, and they are, very particular about the frames. I have 2 new pieces of artwork in my office that I haven't framed yet, and my wife and I will fight about this for months before we get it framed. I have an idea of what I want, she has an idea, then we base it on whatever else is in here, all these other ones, where they fit, all of that stuff. But let the owners of the print do that. Rolling and sending in a tube is okay and probably the easiest for you as an artist. The problem is unrolling those, mounting and framing them. I've seen a lot of prints get damaged, a lot. So I prefer flat prints in thin packaging, where the print goes out, it's flat, and the person who's gonna get it framed just takes it into the framer, they slide it out, and it's ready to go. They don't have to try to flatten it. Mounting is simple. And what if they want to float it? A lot of the prints I have are floated. That print is floated. That print is floated. So if you frame it or you mount it, then people are stuck. So just be as simple on yourself as you can and give them as many options as possible. Number 6, AG23. I mentioned before that we're sort of in an impasse here with one of the sponsors, and but it's, to me, is a temporary actual ebb, a lull, but it's actually not a bad thing because there's so much happening at Blurb. And what I really want to do is to go to Blurb and say, why have we not done anything with this? Like, yes, we printed it, but myself and my co-director, Rick, and beyond, they paid for the printing. It wasn't like Blurb gave us the printing for free. We had to pay for it. So my question is, if this is a Blurb product, I do not want this to become a Blurb marketing campaign. AG23 is its separate thing. But it also highlights one of the best features of Blurb, which is large order services in the offset print division. So if I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, highlight that without it becoming a marketing campaign, then it's a win for everybody. I have to figure out how to do that. So I'm holding off on printing the 3rd issue. I have the contributors, we have the money. I'm holding off on printing it, and I'm trying to build out the digital side, the website. I want to add a blog. I want to redo I want to add the staff profiles because I really want you guys to know who the other contributors and members of the team are. I want to add a blog, and I want to add and start building that community digitally. I actually want to start running features on the website that may or may not end up in the printed zine. And boy, here we have another cloudy/sunny day. So the exposure on this film, let's hope it keeps it together, but it has been so moody. The sky here is absolutely unbelievable in the winter. So that's where we are. This person's question was about selling prints from contributors to help fund AG or offering remote workshops. And number 1 is, I don't want to get the contributors involved in selling prints. It's too complicated. And that should be their business. And I would happily sell prints for them. If one of the contributors came to me today and said, look, I've got a new limited edition run of prints, can you run a feature on the site? I would do that absolutely. I would help them sell, but I don't want to take money from the contributors. I want money to go to the contributors. Next is workshops, too complicated, too time consuming, and COVID-19. We're still in the midst of it here. The numbers in New Mexico are crazy high. 25% are breakthrough cases. The hospitals are being overrun. Texas is sending medical teams all across America, especially in the Midwest, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Minnesota. Those places are hot zones right now. Texas and Florida are trending in the wrong way. We just haven't handled the pandemic well, so getting people together for workshops is going to be tricky, and you have to choose your battles when you do that. I have one workshop coming up. It's in May of next year, so we're still 5 months away. And we also have done a lot of planning, a lot of watching, and my co-instructor just came back from a month in that country, so has a really good idea of what things are happening there. Question 7, keywording for an archive. How important is keywording when you're building an archive? Important's not even the right word. Hang on a second, people. Hang on, hold the phone. I had to just do a little exposure adjustment because I'm such a techie. The word you want is taxonomy. Taxonomy is the practice and science of classification. A couple of years ago, I took something called a metadata boot camp. Yes, I did. Dan Milner took a metadata boot camp, and I was lost, oddly enough. But can you believe that I was really lost? But the thing that came out of it, the couple who teaches this class are awesome. He is a taxonomy expert and is an archivist for a brand, a huge American brand that probably has hundreds of thousands of employees around the world and has been in existence for a long, long time, decades and decades and decades. He is in charge of the taxonomy of that archive. And when he broke down how taxonomy works, I was even more lost than when I went in the room. And I realized this is an art form. And the way taxonomy works is a very specific hierarchy, and it is masterful to understand what that is and how it works. When you see taxonomy in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing, you realize when you develop a sizable archive, it is critical is not even the right word. The archive does not function unless the taxonomy is right. So study taxonomy. There are tons of metadata boot camps out there now. They're being run all over the world. I was actually going to link to one, but there's so many of them. Depends on where you are. So take a look around. Question number 8. You've been talking about Leica a lot. I have. I actually have been talking, and I actually caught myself lurking on the Leica site, but I'll tell you why in a minute, which I'll probably be from right field. Are you going to buy a Leica? No. And why, if you already have Fuji and Sony, would you bother? Okay, so those are two questions. Am I gonna buy a new Leica? No, because they're just simply too expensive. I can buy the new KLR 650 Adventure motorcycle and a new bicycle for less than the new M10R. So I'd rather have the Kawasaki and the bicycle than the M10. But in Leica's defense, Leica is a totally unique beast. They are a very, very unique camera company. The lineup of equipment they make is unlike anything else. And historically, it's unlike anything else. Even their typeface and their design, manufacturing, and polishing is very unique. When you pick up a Leica, it does not feel like anything else. Historically, and I mentioned this in the film I released today, there is this idea in my head, and maybe it's romantic, maybe it's delusional, but this idea that they're, as the lone human being with a Leica telling a story, exploring the world somewhere. That's a magical thing that keeps me motivated all the time, that people are out there doing that. And Leica is a unique beast in that way. The reason I was on the Leica site was initially started as a camera search, but I'm reading this book called Birding Without Borders by Noah Stryker, who's this kid in 2015. He spent 1 year, flew to 41 countries and saw over 6,000 species of birds. Now, I have no interest in doing that, but he's a good writer, and the book is filled with stuff that I wanted to learn about. And there's an image in the back that shows sort of the backpack that he carried. In today's terms, these are every day, but in 2015, I don't think people were doing this quite as much. But it was basically like the one bag he carried through 41 countries. And in it was a camera called something like a Leica Velux or something. It's got this incredible zoom lens, which if you think about, it's a relatively compact camera. He had one lens, it's got this amazing zoom on it, and if your only goal is to photograph birds, that makes total sense. But he also had Leica binoculars. Now, my binoculars are somewhere between 15 and 20 years old. They are Canon 10x32 image stabilization binoculars. Actually, they're right here, like a good amateur birder. Here they are. So I was like, you know, I've had these forever. I haven't looked at another pair of binoculars in 15 or 20 years. And so I thought, I'll look. And so I went to the Leica site. And that's why I was lurking on Leica. And oh, by the way, the binoculars I was looking at on Leica are $3,000. $3,000. Again, that's a new bike. That's like a really nice new bike. And so I was like, oh my God, would I love to look through these? Yeah. Would I love that Velux camera? Probably. I'd find a use for it. How about an M10R? Yep. What about that SL thing? Yep, I'd probably use that as well. It's an amazing brand. That's why I'm there. So am I going to buy one? No. The Fuji is amazing. The Sony is amazing. And if I had a Leica, would I find a way to use it? Yes, but it's not the priority right now because I have such a rare chances to make pictures these days. Number 9, do you have a problem when it comes to book design when you run into running both horizontal and vertical images? This is one of the most popular questions I've ever received about bookmaking. The vast majority of images are shot in landscape or horizontal format. And so people look at a portrait aspect ratio book and they go, well, I can't use that. I got mostly horizontals. But the vast majority of books on my shelf over here, traditionally published books, these are all in portrait format. So it's a design challenge that pretty much every book designer in the world is working on all the time. It's very rare that I have a book that is landscape format filled with landscape images, or landscape filled with square, portrait filled with square. So the portrait format book, this is a basic challenge of design that is worth doing whether or not you print a book or not. Open up the Blurb software or any other software you want to use. Create a body document that's a portrait format and start laying out your horizontal images. And think about things like grids and how grids will play into effect of where those images will be placed, image size. Are you going to do a 4-way bleed, a 2-way bleed across the gutter? All of those things. Look at photography books. They are your best guide. They have already worn down the path that you are walking down as a designer. So my favorite photo book size at Blurb is 8x10 portrait. Soft cover with Proline uncoated paper. That is my favorite combo. You're spending more money on the paper, less on the cover, and you're getting this beautiful thing, and it's in a size that will travel. It's not too big, it's not too small, and it's portrait, so it forces you through that design challenge of using horizontal and portrait images in a portrait format book. Number 10. How do I see your images while listening to your SoundCloud Leica file? So I have a series called the Leica file, which I haven't done in quite some time. I used to do it when I was just blogging. And it basically breaks down a single image I made with this, what I had mentioned earlier about this sort of unique style of the rangefinder doing reportage work. I've mentioned this several times in films as of late. And this was a series that dates way back, years, way back into my blog. So the easiest thing you can do is go to shifter.media, go into the search button and type Leica file, and you will hear the file and you will see the image if that's what you want to do. I'm now basically doing that same series without mentioning the camera brand. I'm just doing notes on photography. A lot of that stuff was made with Leica rangefinders. And so it's the same series in essence, but I'm just not using that title. But if you want to see the image while you're listening, go to shifter.media. Coffee recipe, this is the last question. Coffee recipe, chocolate milk. Now, some of you are like, chocolate milk, what are you, 3? And sometimes I am. Sometimes I do, just like Bobby Lee. Chocolate milk, whatever flavor. Today I had oat milk. Yesterday I had actual real milk. Real milk steams way better than any of the fake milks. So almond, soy, chia seeds, oat milk, whatever, most of them don't steam that well. And also I've cut dairy out of my diet for the last like 7 years, 6.5, 7 years, but occasionally I can put little bits of dairy back in and I'm fine. And also I need calories. If I don't work out constantly, I lose weight like crazy, I lose muscle. And so I need calories. The second I get up in the morning, I'm burning at a high rate, and that little bit of chocolate milk is helpful to me. Second ingredient, espresso coffee. I don't drink drip coffee. I don't drink weak coffee. I don't drink crap. I drink a coffee called La Llave, which is a strong espresso blend. There's plenty of strong espresso blends out there. Not a blend, pure espresso coffee. Wherever you get yours is totally fine. Just don't use weak coffee, and drip coffee is the worst. It gives me the shakes, and I don't find any benefit to it other than the shakes. If you like the shakes, or the Alabama shakes for that matter, then I think drip coffee is fine. The next ingredient, MCT oil. Then you put in a couple of spoonfuls of ghee. This is an offshoot of the bulletproof coffee recipe that's become famous years ago. Then I add cinnamon and I add red chili powder because I do live in New Mexico and we do not consume anything that doesn't have chili in it. So I use a red chili from Chimayo, and it adds a kick of spice to the end of the coffee, which is absolutely mind-blowingly, life-changingly good. My smoothie recipe is a little more complicated. I start with 2 kinds of frozen fruit, most often berries. I use blackberries, I use blueberries, I use raspberries, strawberries, two of those. I use a protein powder called raw meal, which is like an organic meal in a powder, which I really like, and I've been using that for years, and I've even turned on some people who had like some chronic illnesses to it, and they've really benefited from using it. I also use a powder that is for my joint support powder, because Lyme disease did such a number on my joints that I'll take any help I can get. I use chia seeds. I use beet powder, which is a vasodilator that helps here at high elevation. I use chaga, which is a mushroom powder that helps my immune system. And I use a little bit of maca powder too, but primarily for flavor. I think the maca powder has this smoky, sort of Swedish vanilla-y flavor that I really like without adding too much sugar in. I use a little bit of almond butter in there, and also I use a little bit of yogurt, but I use a very specific kind of goat milk yogurt, which doesn't seem to have any ill effects on my body, and I use very sparingly. And then I just put water in it. Sometimes I'll add a little bit more cinnamon. I hit that in the Vitamix, and that is what I have for the first half of the day. I basically have my coffee in the morning, and then a couple hours later I'll have a smoothie, and I don't eat really until the afternoon. And then at night, it's vegetables and protein for me. That's the healthiest how I feel. Now, when I travel, all this is out the window. But when I'm at home, I try to do this. And the simple reason is I just feel better doing this. If I eat carbs and crap and a bunch of stuff like that, I just don't feel well and I don't perform well. And for me, the part that I left out is every day I'm either running, cycling, hiking, paddling, fishing. I'm outdoors as much as humanly possible. And so I need food that fuels my body in these like high elevation climates and in the cold and all that kind of stuff. So that was the Q&A for today at a nice trim and respectable 39 minutes. For me, that's like a brief. That's like a tweet for me, because I can go on. I can ramble talking about myself. What did someone call me recently? Not entitled. No, it wasn't that. I forget. I get called a lot of names. Not necessarily on YouTube, but all the time from all kinds of places. And it happened the second I went on and started blogging. When I deleted social media, holy cow, that was 2 years of verbal lashings from all over the world. just people. I actually love that about the online world, because I can hide from the anonymity of my house and take pot shots at people all over. That's what the internet's about, people. Thanks for tuning into the Q&A. I'm about to record the film about shifter redo, like Matrix. Maybe it's the shifter resolutions or revelations or whatever this new Matrix movie is. Whatever, I'll piggyback. Later.